All right, everyone, we will go ahead and get started. My clock shows 2 o'clock Eastern. Welcome to our July 2026 webinar. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to extend a warm welcome. I am Morgan Kowalski. I'm a NICU parent and the FCC Task Force Director of Operations, and I'm so grateful you took the time out of your busy day to learn with us. As a friendly reminder, I will be sharing all resources and slides presented today, along with a recording of today's talk with you in a follow-up email early next week. I will also drop my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out if you need anything at all. Before we get started, I'd like to share some guidelines for today's webinar. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking and turn off your camera if you need to multitask. We ask that all questions and comments, whether spoken aloud or written in the chat, remain respectful, non-discriminatory, and non-judgmental. Your cooperation helps us keep this space safe and welcoming for everyone. We'd like to recognize Bereaved Parents Awareness Month. This is recognized annually in July and is dedicated to raising awareness about the profound grief parents endure after losing a child, whether that's through miscarriage, stillbirth, infant loss, or the death of a child at any age. Today's talk includes stories of loss, and we encourage you to reach out if you need support. Each of our webinars is dedicated to the NICU children of our NICU parent speakers. Today, we have the honor of dedicating this webinar to Latoya Blueford's daughter, Skylar. Skylar was born January 6th of 2012 and spent 18 months on this earth. Her short life inspired Latoya to establish the Skylar Foundation, which provides resources to NICU and bereaved families by offering financial assistance, care packages, mental health advocacy, and support. Thank you, Latoya, for sharing Skylar and your family's story with us. We also have the pleasure of dedicating this webinar to Tracy's children, Cohen, Cooper, and Mabry. Twins, Cohen and Cooper, were born at 23 weeks gestation, with Cohen passing away shortly after he was born. Mabry was born at 34 weeks gestation following a full-term pregnancy. And Tracy's experience of extreme prematurity, loss, and everything in between inspired her to establish Connected Forever, which supports families experiencing pregnancy loss, infant loss, or a NICU stay by providing resources, education, and emotional support. She also established Rooted Life Empowerment, where she uses her professional experience as a mental health care provider to support folks navigating hard seasons. Thank you, Tracy, for sharing your family's story with us today. As a reminder, our organization follows the all-in meeting guidelines as created by NEC Society. For those of you who are attending for the first time, we use first names to address one another to break down the hierarchy that exists in healthcare and to empower everyone to contribute. I'd like to acknowledge our webinar sponsor, Mead Johnson Nutrition, whose mission is protect, heal, and nurture in the pursuit of a healthier world. Thank you, MJN, for sponsoring this webinar, and congratulations on over 120 years of leadership in pediatric nutrition. This webinar is also sponsored by Small Talk, whose NICU egg system helps families stay connected with their babies during NICU stays. Thank you, Small Talk, for your efforts in ensuring babies are safely exposed to parent voices, which we know has clinical evidence for infant neurodevelopment. Our work is supported by 78 organizational partners who help us share our free educational events, resources, and quality improvement opportunities. It's gotten increasingly difficult to include almost 80 logos in a single slide, so I've gone ahead and listed these organizations here. Thank you to our nationally and internationally esteemed family-led organizational partners, and to our multidisciplinary international and national healthcare-based organizational partners. Even though I've categorized these separately, these groups work together to help us break down the silos that often exist in healthcare and help us bridge the gaps that exist in NICU family-centered care. A warm welcome to our newest organizational partners, Measure the Placenta and NICU Neuroscience. I'll be dropping links for these so you can learn more about their work. The FCC Task Force's guiding principle is equal partnership between healthcare professionals and NICU families, which is exemplified by our leadership team and structure. I would like to acknowledge that our founder and executive director, Malathi Balasundaram, does this work on a strictly volunteer basis, despite it being potentially more demanding than her full-time role as a neonatal intensivist. Thank you to our family partners for their contributions to our work. I love that we are diverse in our infants' gestational ages and diagnoses, and that we represent birthing, non-birthing, adoptive, and bereaved parents. I'd also like to thank our multidisciplinary healthcare partners for volunteering their time and expertise. Many of these folks have also had a NICU experience with their children and donate their time and expertise to our cause. We'd like to thank Colby Day for helping us establish this task force and for all of her contributions to our work over the last 4 years. She will be assuming a Chief of Pediatrics role at her current institution, and we know she'll do amazing things for the babies in her care. Last but not least, we'd like to recognize our board of directors who also donate their time and organizational skills to help our newly formed 501c3 nonprofit organization run smoothly. I'd also like to share that we've got over 3,600 members from all 50 United States, 9 of 10 Canadian provinces, and from 80 countries around the world. It is exciting to see our membership consistently grow by over 100 new community members each month. This month, our poll centers around establishing policies that preserve milestones or firsts for families. I'll drop the link for this poll in the chat so you can share your unit's experience in this area of family-centered care practice. We invite you to join us next week for our FCC Community Exchange session facilitated by Bob Chico and Erica Mendez. They'll be discussing implementing family-centered rounds in the NICU, and we invite you to come with your unit's challenges and barriers toward this practice to learn how you might overcome them. If you haven't checked it out yet, please visit our new and improved website. More dynamic and user-friendly, our new site has gotten us away from the Google Drive links that aren't compatible with many hospital firewalls, and we hope that you love the new look as much as we do. We're grateful to Small Talk NICU Egg System for sponsoring this important website renovation. Our Present Study Toolkit has launched, and it's an incredible resource for NICU leaders and care teams to facilitate zero separation between infants and their parents. This toolkit has been an 18-month-long collaborative effort among 23 authors across the US, Canada, and the UK, and we're so excited to see how your unit uses it to implement FCC practices. Thank you to Angel Eye Health for supporting the creation of this toolkit. We also encourage you to read and share our equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, and justice position statement with your team and explore how your unit can mitigate harm for marginalized families. Last month, we supported 11 FCC scholars in attending the 39th International Grievance Conference and look forward to sharing their reflections with you. We are excited to have awarded 2 family partners, 5 neonatal fellows, 3 early career therapists, and 1 early career nurse through the Michael Heinen Fund, a Kiasi Independent Educational Grant, and with funds from Mead Johnson Nutrition. Don't forget to find us on social media and tag us in your FCC-related work so we can share it. I'd like to add that if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll get early access to a recording of this webinar. And finally, we're so proud of all that we've accomplished in the first half of this year. I'll be sharing a link to this PDF where you can learn more about our 2026 impact so far. And now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to our Director of Impact and Strategy, Kira Sorrells, to introduce our first speakers of the day.
Thanks, Morgan. And hi, everybody. So glad that you're here for today's webinar. I am delighted to be able to introduce our first 2 speakers who are great friends and colleagues of mine, Latoya Blueford and Tracy Pella. I'm going to give you a little bit of background, but I don't want to spend too much time on their bios because I really want to be able to dig into the questions that we have for them. But Latoya is a child loss survivor, a former NICU mother, and certified pregnancy and infant loss advocate whose lived experience is the foundation of everything she does. Her daughter, Skylar, spent much of her 18 months of life in the NICU. Through that experience and the healing that followed, Latoya identified the gaps in support that so many NICU and bereaved families face. In July 2021, she founded the Skylar Project, a nonprofit created in her daughter's honor. The Skylar Project provides financial assistance, care packages, NICU community events, and mental health advocacy, connecting families to the support they need while they navigate through one of the most isolating journeys a family can face. Her mission extends beyond direct family support into legislative advocacy and systems change. She works to bring awareness to the U.S. infant mortality rate, the need for NICU family paid leave, and House Resolution 236, the NICU Babies Bill of Rights, all while continuing to champion new approaches to family centered care. Latoya believes the trauma of a NICU stay or child loss can be overcome with time and the right support, and it is her hope that by sharing her experience and expertise, she can offer hope to so many families who desperately need it during their darkest chapter. Tracy Pella's proudest accomplishments are being a wife and the mom to 3 children on earth and 1 in heaven. She is the founder and principal consultant of Rooted Life Empowerment and co-founder and president of Connected Forever, a Nebraska nonprofit supporting families impacted by pregnancy loss, infant loss, and NICU stays. Following the premature birth of her twins at 23 weeks, the loss of her son Cohen, her son Cooper's extensive NICU stay, and ongoing journey with prematurity and retinopathy of prematurity, and the later preterm birth of her daughter Mabry at 34 weeks. As a licensed mental health practitioner and school psychologist, Tracy's work combines lived experience with professional expertise to strengthen family-centered care, communication, and connection across healthcare and education. She is passionate about helping healthcare professionals and organizations build meaningful connections with families by ensuring lived experience remains at the heart of family-centered care. Latoya and Tracy, thank you so much for being here. We're so glad to have you and to learn from your experiences.
Thank you, Kira.
Thanks, Kira.
Yeah, so obviously I've read through your bios, but it's nothing like hearing the words straight from the person who lived it. So, Latoya, could we start with you and just invite you to share more details about your NICU experience and loss?
More details. So my NICU experience was quite extensive. Skylar was in the NICU for 10 months. But just to speak a little bit about my C-section when I was rolled in, just the amazing staff. I did want to kind of highlight that. That was the beginning of her NICU stay. And so when I was met with the staff, the transportation staff, they came in and they looked me right in my eye. We were eye to eye. And they said, "Do you have any questions for me?" It was all about their presence. So it set the tone for my trust when Skylar was taken to the NICU. She was there for 10 months and we had quite a few ups and downs. She had undiagnosed pulmonary hypertension. Somehow they didn't catch it. They tried to close the PDA for whatever reason. It didn't show up and they didn't catch it. So she got out of the NICU and we spent about 10 months together at home. It was amazing. We did PT, OT, ST. Then she got a cold. Once your lungs are already compromised and you catch a cold, that's a little bit of a problem. So we went into the PICU. That was pretty horrific and traumatic, but she passed away. And that's what brought me to this work. I did a lot of healing work, but now I've healed enough and I'm able to utilize those experiences for something constructive and something that's helpful and useful for people who are in my situation.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so very sorry for the loss of Skylar, and just thank you so much for, really being able to transform that heartache into something so positive for so many families.
Thank you.
So Tracy, what about you? Could you share a little bit more about your NICU experience?
Yeah, so like in my bio, our twin boys were born at 23 weeks and 4 days. I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but a very emergency C-section, like within minutes. And we found out very quickly after I woke up that our son Cohen had passed away. They were unable to stabilize him. And in the next room, we got to meet our son Cooper, weighing 14.8 ounces, and he spent about 5 months in the NICU, endured several surgeries, lots of ups and downs, as we all know, and was able to come home on oxygen, several medications. We are a rural family, so yet I I call it very lucky to be within an hour and a half to 2 hours of most of our specialists. And so he is now 15, and in the NICU, we did receive a ROP diagnosis. At the time, we didn't realize that was a literal life-altering diagnosis for him. He is 15 and legally blind. And so we continue to see the effects of his extreme prematurity. And then a few years later, we did go on to have a full-term baby and then had another NICU stay with our last baby, Mabry, at 34 weeks. She had a 14-day stay there and now is a thriving 9-year-old.
Thank you. And again, also so sorry about Cohen and that loss. So between both of you, you've got a 5 month stay plus a stay with Mabry, an ROP diagnosis. Latoya, you had 10 months in the NICU. You know, it is impossible to not hear hard things, difficult diagnoses, you know, clinicians giving you news that you would rather not hear. I mean, it's impossible not to have that when you're in an intensive care situation. Um, are there any instances or moments that come up for you? You know, anything that you would like to share with us that really made an impact on you, either, you know, whether it was something that was handled well or something that could have been handled better. And I'll go back to you, Latoya.
Just to kind of circle back to my C-section. So I was 22 years old, rolled into the OR. I didn't know what a NICU was, a PICU. I never knew a critical baby, a baby with complications even. I knew none of that. So rolling into this, I was terrified to say the least. But the NICU transport team, his name was Dr. Siegfried, he came in and he got on my level. He was I just remember after our conversation, I was so at ease. And how are you at ease when that type of trauma, you're about to go into a new world? But it was more about the nonverbal cues. He truly was present and he stayed. If you have any other questions, he gave me the statistics. He didn't make any promises that I knew he couldn't keep, but he was so present, so compassionate. And even the nurse anesthetist, I hope I said that right. I was laying down and she told me, she said, "Are you scared?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Well, I put extra in the spinal tap for you." And just the fact that they took that extra time and the nonverbal, those just made the situation so much less frightening for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, to hear someone who is having an emergency C-section with a preterm child say that they felt at ease, I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. The way that doctor was able to support you in that moment. Really, yep, Malathi, fully present. Absolutely. Tracy, what about you? Any memories are coming up for you or things that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are one of the questions. Like, I think I could talk about this forever. But I think two of the things that really stick out for me is, as I mentioned, our C-section was very emergent. Again, we live about an hour from the hospital that we delivered at. I was 23 and 4. I was going to the MFM appointment because I worked in that town, assuming, right? No one has, like Latoya said, no one has babies at 23 weeks, right? My lunch was still in my car. I was gonna go to work, and the doctor, or I could tell immediately from the ultrasound tech that something was wrong. She said, "I'll grab the doctor. You call your husband," because my husband, we are a farm family, so he was back working. And within minutes, the doctor came in, or seconds probably, and the doctor came in and said, "If we want to give both of your boys a chance to live, we have to deliver immediately," which meant literally running across the hospital. And I remember asking, like, "Can the nurse come with me?" And the doctor said, "Yes, whatever you need." So the nurse went with us across the hospital, down the elevator, across the floor to the operating room. And when we got to that operating room, I remember the doctor saying, "We have to go." and the nurse holding my hand looking at me, and she said, "We're going to do everything we can for you and your babies." I still tear up 15 years later because I can hear her voice saying that. And I think it really was that I felt that she really did care about me. Turns out that nurse and I have lots of connections, and she actually grew up in the town about 15 minutes from where I grew up. And now we have become incredible friends. But I was alone, literally. I delivered my 23-week twins without my husband present. And I felt at that moment that I wasn't alone. I felt like someone really did care about me. And the other time that really sticks out was very shortly after I was obviously had to put under full anesthesia to deliver the boys, and I woke up and didn't know if my babies were alive. And when I was rolled down to the NICU, I remember the nurse telling me, "Tracy, we're so sorry. There's nothing else we can do." And as she placed Cohen on my chest, she started crying. And I think everyone in the room was crying, but it was that it felt so human, right? Like it was honestly that one of the worst moments of my life, but it felt like she was a human and she cared about me and my family. And we had never met. Like, this was delivery day and we had just met. So I think those are kind of two major ones that stick out to me because they were not people that I had a relationship with. And I think a lot of times throughout our NICU stay, we developed those relationships, and those conversations changed a little bit when we already had that relationship. But both of these providers had no relationship or connection to us, but they were able to make that pretty instantly.
I think that's pretty profound because, a lot of times when we have, an opportunity to do Q&A with NICU care teams, I'm sure you all have both been asked, what's the right thing to say? I don't know the right thing to say. And I think what you both have described is there is no right thing to say, but it really is those nonverbal cues, those, looking you in the eyes, holding your hand, knowing that they care. I mean that it's it's that being human to another human, right? In when you're in the most vulnerable place in your life, really.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, so let's think about this now because I don't know about you guys, but for me, it took a while to actually process the experience of the NICU. I mean, years later, I think I'm still processing moments of it. But thinking back again and, kind of having that rear view mirror, is there anything that you would have changed, or did you have moments, that could have been better? And Tracy, why don't we go back to you?
Yeah. So I want to preface this by saying our care providers were incredible. We are still very deeply close to them, and there are lots of moments that went well. There are lots of things that went well, but one of the things that really stuck out to me was Cooper was having his PDA, and he was just a few weeks old. And I will never forget where I was sitting when the heart surgeon was telling us the risks. And like we talked about, I know I need to know the risks, right? I need to know what we're in for. But he looked at us and said, "I've never had a baby bleed out, but someone has to be the first." And those words will never leave my mind. And I remember going back to the unit because we were out in a waiting room, and we went back to the unit, and the nurses and the neos and everyone was so incredibly supportive, and apologized. But it was in that moment that I was literally grieving my son. We were planning a funeral about that time, and I was grieving Cohen, but yet sending my less than 2 pound baby off for heart surgery. And that's all I could think about. And I know, again, maybe that I needed to be told the negatives, but maybe a little bit more of a careful, supportive, trauma-informed communication might have changed that experience pretty significantly for us. And then one of the really, really things that went really well, one of the things I really struggled with was I was very afraid our boys wouldn't be together because Cooper's odds of surviving were very low. And I struggled with having a funeral and our choice of burying Cohen. And I kept saying, but what if Cooper dies? And for being a pretty positive person, when I look back the trauma that we were enduring, I just kept saying, but what if Cooper dies? And the neonatologist sat down with me, and what felt like for hours. And she sat beside me in Cooper's NICU room and just listened. And I remember her saying, I don't have the words, Tracy. I can't decide this for you, but I just need you to know you're not alone. And she kept saying, you're the mom, right? Like, and she goes, I know that doesn't make it easier, but I don't remember everything she said to me, but she was, like we've talked about already, so fully present. I remember her tearing up with me, and I remember her just saying, Tracy, you and Jesse, my husband, you get to decide this. Like, don't let other, because I felt a lot of pressure to have the funeral, to, the funeral home was calling, and I felt very pressured to make these decisions, but I wasn't ready to make those decisions. And her really both supporting both me and Jesse made such a huge difference in just me being able to feel listened to, but that really empowered that we were driving it and we were the ones that got to make the decision, not being felt pressured from outside sources.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I see, some comments that communication shapes care and, really having that, I mean, that is a large portion of it, isn't it? It's just feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling validated, and feeling empowered. Uh, Latoya, what about you?
And it was those experiences that weren't the best. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, that could have gone better.
I can think of one experience where we had a different neonatologist. And mind you, Dr. Siegfried was next to him during this event, who was one of my favorites. So this other neonatologist walks up to me and my husband while we're at Skylar's bedside, and he says, she's going to have this surgery. Didn't say hi, didn't say why. And I just started crying because I think she was about 6 months in, and there was no conversation about a surgery. And so I got really upset. And so Dr. Siegfried was like, wait a minute, we don't do that here. You don't tell a parent that they're going to have surgery like that. You didn't even explain to her what was going on. So it was like a great thing that he let him know, that's not how you do things. And it was sad that I had that reaction. But that was probably one of the most difficult situations in the NICU for me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like Jess just said, what you both have shared, communication in the NICU is so important. I mean, here you are, Latoya, I believe Skylar would be 13 this year. Is that correct?
14. 14.
14. And Tracy, Cooper is 15. I mean, this is not yesterday. And you guys remember these things very clearly. I think that that's something that's really important to point out too, is that, um, that communication, it sets us up for post NICU as well, right? And, um, and it's a small amount of time in when you look at the lifespan of a human when you're in the NICU, but those moments are very impactful. Um, did so I mean it sounds like both, from both sides that you certainly did have thankfully some supportive care teams. So did you feel that that your mental health was understood, that through the way that they were communicating with you, sharing information with you, that they understood that you were in a vulnerable space? Latoya,
Um,
what's your take on that?
I would say with a few doctors who ended up being one of our favorites, Dr. Khan, Dr. Siegfried, I kind of feel like they could feel what I was feeling and they kind of fed off of my energy. If, Skylar had to be reintubated, they were there to be like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I had to do this, but she's okay, that type of thing. But when it came to everyone else, I don't think that they were tuned in to
Mm.
the trauma that I was facing. I don't think everyone has that innate ability to do that. Now, I think you could be trained and you can be given tips on how to be aware, but I just think some just they were like, what's wrong with her? Or, that type of
Mhm.
thing. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why it's so important that entire teams are trained, even, whoever's answering the phone or, at the front desk to who, cleans, takes out the trash. Everybody needs to be trained. What about you, Tracy? And you had your mental health training already. So I'd be interested to know, kind of what your view was, both as a practitioner and as a mom in terms of looking and being a part of those communications.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. I always call it being on the other side of the table from being that
Hmm.
provider and the mental health practitioner. And I think overall, I think it really just depended, like Latoya mentioned, it really just depended on the person. I feel like our primary nurses, we were in a smaller unit probably compared to a lot of other units. And so I think that was it. I think also, I like to know, as Kira mentioned, my NICU stays were 15 years ago and 9 years ago. So being involved in the mental health world now in the NICU, a lot has changed since I was there. So a lot more screeners, a lot more discussion, a lot more resources around that. So but I think it was also just for us, we had things happening outside our world. And I think for me, a lot of the time, the mental health would come with the acknowledgement of even though maybe Cooper was doing great or had a great couple days, it was still the grief there. And I think for us, a lot of it, when I think back, it's the people that were acknowledging that we may be still grieving, and I think that was a
Hmm.
huge thing for us.
Hmm.
And yeah, so overall, I feel like they were supportive. But I do think, there was just some conversations that even if it was a really bad day for me, like the conversation still had to happen, unfortunately. And so I
Right.
think they were very supportive in that way. And obviously, some of
Hmm.
those that we had the better connections and relationships with were always kind of checking in, especially if they knew maybe a conversation didn't go well or, something maybe that they wouldn't always see as supportive and agree to, they always really followed up with that too.
So, as we think about what we've heard so far from you all, I mean, I'm hearing just the presence, being physically present, but also just, connected kind of emotionally with you was very important. Again, feeling heard was very important. Um, and it sounds like you both also had you felt a sense of safety with these teams. Is there anything else you think that you would want a NICU team to know about when it comes to optimal communication in the NICU? Latoya?
I think cultural competency and humility, like Jane told us, I believe.
Yeah.
Just understanding that certain people have different communication styles, just having a heart to be open to that. Everyone you're not going to relate to. So just being aware of those biases that we all hold, because this is a, crisis for these parents. It's a crisis. So try to reach across and try to relate to them. And I'm sure they'll be open to it if they see that you're trying.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Latoya. What about you, Tracy?
Um, I think it really comes down to like to think about it like truth with care, like especially in the hard
Mm.
conversations. Like I need to hear the truth, right? And some days that was easier than others, but I really needed you to show up and care for me. And I think it's as a provider, you may have told a family the same thing, 1,000 times, and it may be the third time today you're telling a family that, we had to re-intubate or we had, your son's, it was always that weekly exam, and then all of a sudden it was like everything that we had hoped wouldn't happen, happened, and we were having ROP surgery within a few days, and so I always think about maybe you've told a family that a few times, but for us these words are life altering. They will stick with us, and and now we didn't even know it at the time, but now 15 years later it really is. Having an ROP diagnosis has changed Cooper's life. And so I just always think about that is to kind of take the moment and center ourselves, because what might just seem like another conversation is really, a completely life-changing conversation for that family.
One thing that I've learned from Sue Ludwig, the president of the National Association of Neonatal Therapists, from her book, is she would talk about before she would enter a baby's bed space, she would always just take even just 10 seconds, you know, just to do exactly what you said, to kind of pause, to center herself, to, remove whatever might be trailing behind her from other cases that may be difficult so that she could be, with the baby uh, present. Um, and that is so important. And it's also, I think, it's important to remember, and I think it's important to remind the care teams too, that you won't get it perfectly every time, and that's okay. And when you can admit when you haven't gotten it perfectly, um, that can rebuild any trust that might have faltered. We've got about 5 more minutes. Do you have anything else that you want to share with the group before we transition over to our next presenter? Latoya, do you have any final words?
Just thank you. Thank you for hearing our voices and our experiences and letting us and honor our babies this month. Thank you. That's all I want to say.
Thanks, Latoya. Tracy?
Yes, I just echo what Latoya said. And also, I think it's really, we all learn. And like Kira said, I think it really just comes back to like, it's okay to say you don't know. I always tell people, ask me all the time. I do a lot of work around grief and I still get asked, what do I say? What do I not say? What do I write on the card? What do I do? And I always say, it's okay to say, I don't know what to do. And I think that with families, I think sometimes we look at, as providers, we have to be perfect or we should know what to say. And I think it's okay just to be present. I think some of the most memorable moments for me were really when no words were said. So, and again, just appreciate being able to share the parent voice. And I think together we're better, being able to come together as a team and learn. So, thank you.
Thank you both so much. Thank you for being here with us, for being so vulnerable and open with your experiences and for the work that you do for families. We're so happy to have you as a part of our community. So I'm going to now pass it on to my colleague Morgan, who is going to introduce our next presenter.
Thank you, Kira. And I echo you, Tracy and Latoya. We are just so incredibly grateful to be able to learn from your lived experience and your family's journeys, and sending you both love. Um, I will now take this opportunity to introduce Anthony Orsini. And Anthony, you're welcome to share your screen at any point during this introduction. I am going to shorten Anthony's very impressive bio just a little bit for the sake of time, but I'll drop the entire thing in the chat. Dr. Anthony Orsini is a practicing neonatologist, best-selling author, and internationally renowned keynote speaker who has dedicated his career to transforming the culture of healthcare through better communication. He is widely regarded as a leading expert in compassionate, emotionally intelligent communication, particularly during critical, high-stakes conversations. His journey began with a single life-altering moment early in his medical career, one that revealed the profound impact of words during moments of crisis. That experience became the catalyst for his life's mission, which is to teach healthcare professionals how to communicate with empathy, clarity, and purpose. Thank you for joining us here today, Anthony. I will let you take it from here.
Okay, I'm off mute now. So can everybody see my screen?
We can see your screen, but not
Like
slides
so.
yet.
There you
There
go.
you go. And we
Okay,
can
good.
see your speaker notes, just a heads up.
Oh, I don't need to know that. Well, there are no really speaker notes, so that's fine. So, um, what do you see now?
Now we
View
see your desktop.
slideshow. Come on. There we go. I don't know why you see the speaker notes, but that's fine.
But you can
Okay.
Um,
swap the displays, Tony. You can swap the displays
uh,
thank you,
Say,
on the
click
tip.
Use Slideshow right there, up at the top, right above your head.
view
Right
slideshow.
there. There you
Is
go.
it?
Perfect. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. Well, thank you for having
We're all
me.
doing it together.
And thank you for sharing your story. Latoya and Tracy, your stories. There's a lot of things that you said that really hit home and is something that I've dedicated my life to doing and to trying to help those moments. I'm so glad that you had some wonderful moments with neonatologists and physicians and nurses who are and NICU teams who were there for you. But as we also know, that's not something that is universal. And most parents like you have different stories of good and bad and how profoundly that affected you. And my journey started out as, a very blessed person. I was doing pediatrics and neonatology, and I had really never suffered a lot of grief in my life. I still had my parents, and I was just very, very blessed. But I was even more blessed because where I trained was the who's who of neonatology at that time. But they were more than that. They were the pediatricians and neonatologists that I worked with were also the nicest, most compassionate physicians that I had ever seen. And yet the dichotomy of that was that often I saw these very compassionate, really good people over and over struggle with delivering bad news. And since I had not really experienced that, I was very comfortable with the clinical as I was finishing up my training. But it still scared me to death because I saw these very accomplished people that I looked up to sometimes make things worse, and not because they weren't good people. It was obvious. Um, and then we talked about in the introduction about a profound thing that happened, and I'll spare you the long version. But basically, I was almost ready to graduate, and I was going out into the world to become a neonatal attending at NYU, and I was finishing up my training in Philadelphia, and I had a baby that I had to go pick up with severe pulmonary hypertension across the bridge in New Jersey. I went with the NICU team, and very sadly, on the way home, the baby started to code. I did a full resuscitation. When I got back to the unit, the um, the neonatologist and I both continued trying to code this baby to get him onto ECMO, but very sadly, he passed away. The father had followed the ambulance in the car, and the uh, charge nurse, told me right after we pronounced that the father was waiting for us in the waiting room. And so the attending physician that I was on with that day was probably one of the nicest, and I still look up with him, and he's an amazing people in the world. And I thought to myself, well, this is a good opportunity for me to finally learn how to do this. How do you tell somebody that their baby died? Because I've seen it done so many times well, but also a lot of times bad. And we went to the room together. I asked him if I could watch, and this kind, compassionate man, who was just an amazing person, inexplicably just opened up the door. When we opened up the door, the father was there, and he was pacing back and forth. Nobody had told him anything. And this kind, compassionate man just blurted out, "I'm Dr. So and so, and your baby's dead." And the father went crazy. He literally punched a hole in the wall, knocked the table lamp down. And I thought, oh my goodness, what did he just do? And it took a while for the father to calm down. Um, and we brought the father to see the baby. I stayed with him for a few minutes. And then when I got back out into the hallway and left the father there by himself, there was Dr. We call him Dr. Cunningham. That's not his real name. There was Dr. Cunningham, and he was waiting for me in the hallway. And he grabbed me by my scrubs and he pulled me in really close, and he was crying. And he said to me very firmly, he said, "Do you see what I just did? Don't ever do that." And then he walked out into the hallway and to the fire escape, and he cried for like 20 minutes. And in that time, I realized that if this kind, compassionate man, who was the smartest person I ever know, still struggled with doing this with his 25 years experience, what choice do I have? And so I spent really the next 10 years of my life doing as much research about this to see, is there two questions? Is there a right and a wrong way of doing this? And if there is, can this be taught? And there was very little literature out there. For those neonatologists, something called spikes had just come out. or actually hadn't even come out yet when I first started. But I interviewed NICU parents. I interviewed parents who were children had cancer. I interviewed husbands who lost their wives, and a clear pattern emerged over 10 years and dozens and dozens and dozens of interviews about two things. One is what helped and what hurt, but two, what was it about the physician that they thought either fondly of or not fondly? And we heard some stories about that. And so a clear pattern emerged about that this is an opportunity to help families when they need us the most. And then I said, well, let's see if we can teach it. And so we started out with some role playing with the residents, and that was a disaster because there was a lot of, asking a resident to be an actor. There was a lot of giggles and there was too much peer pressure. And then finally in 2010, I came across a professional production company who then we trained to partake in different scenarios for not just pediatrics, but for adults, et cetera. And since then, we've trained individually like 4,000 residents and senior physicians, and I don't know how many through workshops. But the reality is that there are difficult conversations are everywhere. They're in neonatology, they're in medicine, they're in our personal lives, they're in our business. And if you really look at them, it's the same concepts and the same skills that are required to help a mother in her entire worst time of her entire life. It's the same skills that you need for your personal life also. But one of the things that I forgot who spoke about earlier is that this is also a big source of stress for doctors um, because we're not trained, and why we're not trained always seemed absurd to me. I mean, there's some data that shows that if a physician delivers bad news poorly, it can affect closure for up to 30 years. And yet, to put such a serious procedure on a physician and then only spend maybe a half hour in medical school or a quick lecture to teach them how to do this also um, creates a lot of stress. And in fact, studies have shown that the mere thought of just having a physician think about having to deliver sad or tragic news spikes blood pressure, cortisol levels, etc. And it shouldn't be that way. But again, I'm a neonatologist. If you asked me to do heart surgery, I would be really, really stressed. And this is what we're doing even today. Now, the ACGMEs in medical school are starting to stress we need to train doctors on how to do this. But I can tell you that when I work with residents and attendings, almost no one remembers the training that they've had because it's really just glossed over in 20 minutes. And so it is a source for us and also leads to moral injury and also leads to burnout in physicians. So for me, having trained these physicians on how to deliver the news, because I really don't think that, or I know it's not that these people are not compassionate. And I think somebody said earlier that some people have or they don't. Well, we've looked at this. There's out of the thousands and thousands of physicians that we've trained, I could say we looked at this. About 15% of the physicians that I trained, we put through this process with the actors and or they do it in real life and they're naturals. They're just beautiful. They're compassionate. They show their compassion. They really need very little training. There's sadly about 10 to 15% that I can train all day long and are just never going to be able to do this. And I hate to say that. But the other 70 to 80% of the physicians genuinely show an incredible amount of appreciation when someone finally sits with them and teaches them how to do this because they've been, and I'm talking oncologists that have been doing this for 30 years that have said to me, I feel so much better. So it's something that can be taught to 85 to 90% of people. It's just that we just need to start teaching them. I'm going to show a few videos. Hopefully this will play. If it doesn't, please tell me. This is just some thoughts with parents, and Latoya and Tracy did it beautifully, talking about their horrible experience with physicians and nurses that um, that maybe did not do this correctly. And then we're going to ask some physicians if they remember the first time they had to deliver bad news. And I can tell you, almost every physician remembers the first time they had to give bad news, because almost every one of them, even 20 or 30 years later, is wondering whether they really helped her. So let's see this,
My
please. Can
mom
you
had been
hear that?
diagnosed with breast cancer that had metastasized throughout her body. One physician in particular who was extremely blunt and he was very matter of fact about it, just basically walked in and said there's nothing else that we can do for her. And to put her on dialysis would basically be a huge waste of money on your part.
I don't believe that they realize the impact they have on how it's said.
Nurse just looked at me, pointed at the room, and said, "She's in there. She's dead."
And within 5 minutes, my whole world had changed, and I was leaving the office despondent, alone, and unsure of what to do next.
They really need to realize that the parent is now not just a parent, but also a patient.
I really felt very good about my clinical skills. I felt very competent, and I had sort of achieved a level where I felt good about myself. And I remember taking care of this critically ill child for probably a month in the hospital. And then one night he was essentially dying. I had nothing else to offer him. I didn't know what to do about that. I called the attending at night, and I remember it so well. Then he said, "No, Gaines, you should feel very confident. You've done everything that could be done for that child, that he's dying." And I said, "But the family's in there. I don't know what to say."
The attending said, "Okay, the parents are here. I think it's time that we have the discussion about withdrawal of support." And he turned to me and said, "Have you ever done this before?" And I said, "No, obviously. I was just out of my intern year." And he said, "Well, good. You've got to learn how to do this sometime, so it might as well be now." And I had to sit there and tell this family that we thought that the best thing would be to withdraw support, knowing full well that this mom could not have any more children.
I was so conscious of being so inadequate. I didn't know what I was saying. I tripped over myself in language. I made things worse. But I remember the dichotomy between being a good doctor, and I really felt very confident as a physician, but I felt so totally inadequate in caring for that last moment of life.
It was terrible. And I always think about that family and whether or not, how they felt about the whole thing. I think it could have been done much better.
So, as I said, the good news, this can be taught, and I mentioned how we do this, and I think the beauty of the program, and I'm not here to say how my program is the best or anything like that, but I think the main thing that we do is that we bring this topic to the top of the residents and senior physicians' mind, because communication is not something that's stressed. And we, as physician leaders and nursing leaders and uh, family-centered people, have to constantly remind them that medicine is, at its core, a human-to-human interaction. We get so focused on the science that we forget about this. And if you asked me what my goal in life would be, I would be to tell you that my goal is to think of this process, to having difficult conversations with families, is to make every physician stop thinking of this as a task that they need to get over with, and start thinking of it as skill that they can be proud of because they are helping parents in their worst moments. And so we started this Breaking Bad News program, and we use this program acronym. And I'm going to go over this program acronym for the neonatologists and the social workers and the other people in here. We'll kind of go through it quickly, but only to say that it's a structured roadmap of the way we can get physicians to remember, and risk managers. We do this for medical malpractice errors, we do this for all kinds of things, but it's a structured way of trying to remember what the steps are, because I want everyone to understand that this is a skill that can be mastered, and get away from the thought that you either have it or you don't. You're either compassionate or you're not. My experience is that everyone is compassionate nearly, but we've just gotten away from it because it's not something that's reminded how important it is. For those physicians in the audience right now, you may be familiar with something called spikes. Spikes, for those people who aren't familiar with that, was a study written in 1999, I believe, 2000 it was published. It was really the first and one of the very first approach to teaching doctors. It was really, Dr. Bailey was really one of the ones that just basically said, let's see if we can come up with a system on doing that. The problem with spikes is, I went through my interviews over and over again, that there were a couple things about spikes that my parents and my family members and the people who I interviewed took really had some difficulty with, especially with the abruption, how abruptly the news is told to give, and et cetera. Unfortunately, spikes is taught in still medical schools today. There's some good things about it, but we've been kind of trying to get medical schools away from spikes, going more towards the program. And there's a couple issues with spikes that I said that make actually people some angry. And so, in the 1997 patient and doctor were different than 2026. And I'm not taking away from spikes, but if you've heard that term and know that term, I'll go over what a couple problems with it and maybe get you away from using that. And our program has been successful in just training 1 hour with these doctors. We went from 93% of the participants who felt anxious about delivering bad news to, anonymous surveys weeks later saying that they now felt very, very prepared. So it doesn't take a long time to teach this. And in many ways, it's mostly just bringing it up to them to let them understand it is a thing. Most of the doctors that we train don't even realize it's a thing. One of the biggest problems that we had, and our parents this morning were really discussing it and kind of leading up to this, is that we as a society, but especially in medicine, have confused the term information and communication. And when I train or give workshops or do keynote speaking, I will ask physicians, what is your main goal when you're having this difficult conversation with a family? And almost always the answer is, I wanted to provide all the information as possible. And I usually just say to them, then why didn't you just hand them a ChatGPT piece of paper? And of course, they look at me and they go, that's crazy. I would never do it. And I go, well, that's the point. The point is, this is a human to human interaction, and the information is extremely important. But the information comes forth. The first thing that is important is that you show compassion, that your nonverbals and your verbal cues are showing that you're really there, you're present, you are understand that this is the most serious conversation that you're going to have, and that even though it may not even be devastating news, it may just mean your child has to have a minor surgery, etc. But you have to understand that this is not this is unique to that family, and it may be your third time that you've given news like this week. But you have to put yourself in that position, and they have to look you in the eyes and know that you really care. You also have to show you're the expert in the room, that they feel that they can figuratively put their arms over your shoulders and you are going to lead them. I got you. I'm here for you. I'm not going anywhere. And that's the third one is I'm going to stay with you. Time and time again, when human beings are uncomfortable with the situation, what do? They try to get in and they try to get out. They try to hide their emotions. And then we talked about moral injury and physician burn, all that. This just leads into all that because, in general, we all do want to be there for our patients. Information will come later and can come at the same time. But if you don't have these three things, nobody's going to believe your information to begin with because they don't believe that you know what you're talking about or that you even care. So I'm going to go over the program very quickly. Again, most of the people in this audience are not physicians, but just to kind of familiarize with how we do teach this and the common pitfalls that happen with physicians. And the first thing is P is for plan and position. And it surprises me that how many people will go into these kind of difficult conversations, whether they're social workers or physicians or nurses, without having any plan, without thinking about it, without getting into the mindset about what this means, without closing their eyes and putting themselves in that mother's shoes. Maybe we just came back from 6 deliveries and our heart's beating, and now the family's waiting for us. We need to come up with a plan, and we need to make sure that we're in the type of mindset. I have a colleague that I teach with, and she jokes like the first thing you should do as a physician before you deliver bad news is take your own pulse. And it's really important to get into that mindset. The other thing is, it's astounding to me how many physicians and how many times you will see bad news delivered or even a serious conversation about something without the physician sitting down. And these are real live residents participating in the Breaking Bad News program that's given me permission to use their pictures of going through these scenarios. And you can just see that if you don't sit down and everybody doesn't sit down, this is going to be, you're starting out with 2 strikes. It is not optional to have any conversation standing up, but it's certainly not even an option to do it when there's a difficult conversation. In the NICU that I worked previously, where we implemented this whole thing, a very large neonatal intensive care unit in Florida, the nurses were trained that when a physician comes into a room, usually it's a subspecialist, and there's a conversation going on about surgery, et cetera, that it's not an option for that physician to do it standing up. So the nurse will then say, Dr. Orsini, would you like a chair? And if I'm the surgeon or somebody, I would say, no, I'm good. And then the nurse would say, well, Dr. Orsini, let me get you a chair. And if the doctor still doesn't sit down, the nurse will gently nudge the back of his or her knees until she sits down. So we know that this is important. And if you don't do that, you're setting yourself up for failure. And where you sit, this is a conflict resolution scene where the doctor is sitting in the middle. This is an actor sitting in the middle, did not position themselves. If it was a bad news and they're sitting in the middle, it's okay to ask a parent to, why don't you two come over there? Let me come over here and I'll talk. Time and time again in the first 2 mothers were Latoya and Tracy were talking about nonverbal cues, right? The nonverbal cue here is not one of compassion. It's actually with the palms up, you're sitting in the middle, your legs are crossed, etc. So you're really starting off with, now look at this. Beautiful examples of doctors, even though these are actors, doctors are talking to actors, beautiful examples of what a difficult conversation should look to. The upper right-hand corner, that one doctor, the mother is showing her frustration with something. The doctor's sitting there. She's present. She's looking in her eyes. She's not in a hurry. Way different than the ones where the doctor's standing up and seems to be uncomfortable. The second letter is R, and R is basically teaching the doctors, because the most common mistake, and a lot of that comes from spikes, is to come out and deliver the news immediately. We know that once a family member hears tragic news, less than 10% is remembered. And we also know that it's a human reaction that when you hear bad news, to first believe that it's not true. By doing a proper reviewing, having the doctor, after he or she has positioned themselves, sit down with the family, show the proper body language, and then going over the what happened from the beginning, even if it is 2 or 3 or 4 sentences, um, to explain that this is where we are. And here's the key: the doctor should be able to discuss why he or she has come up with this reluctant conclusion. In other words, if there's someone said there's nothing else we can do, or that your baby's going to have to need laser surgery, or et cetera, it's very important for you to explain to that family that this is the evidence that we have. I wish there was another outcome, but at this point, I don't. This is our reluctant diagnosis, and that's extremely important, because if you don't, it's going to there's going to be a lot of doubt and maybe distrust. A big part of our program is lay people who are instructors. When we train physicians on how to deliver bad news or navigate difficult conversations, when we're doing the one-on-one thing, there is always 1, 2, or 3 lay people like Tracy or Latoya in that room, that when we go over this with the family, with the doctors, they're there to validate, to say, yes, that is true, or this was my experience, and that's why this is so important. So it's important that physicians hear that, and I just wanted to mention that. And I'm not going to really get into these videos here, but we have examples of what happens when you don't do a review, what happens when you do a review. And for time purposes, I'm not going to go over that, because I feel like this crowd is going to be having some great questions and I want to interact. So I'm going to skip over these next 2 videos that are really more for when we're training physicians. And the O is observe. Time and time again, Tracy and Latoya talked about nonverbal language. Nonverbal language is something that we know exists, but often forget about it. It is there from when the time babies are born. We are experts at interpreting nonverbal language, and in fact, neuroscientists in some books will claim that our minds are interpreting someone's nonverbal language 3 million times a second. If you haven't read Simon Sinek's book, Blink, it's just an incredible example of what nonverbal language, the power of nonverbal language is. The problem is that although physicians are trained to be observers, we're trained to look at the patient, see if they look sad, look at the patient if they wince when I push on their belly, watch them. We don't realize that we are being observed also. And when our verbal and our nonverbal language don't coincide, this doctor could be saying all the right things. He could have compassion in his voice and really really say everything right. But the problem is with that is that his body language and the way he's sitting is very casual. And our minds cannot understand 2 conflicting ideas at one time. In other words, I can't tell you that it's nighttime and I can't tell you it's daytime at the same time. Your brain's going to have to decide which one. What happens in situations when we do this is that the patients and the family members are saying he's saying all the right things, he's got the proper tone, he's got the proper inflection, but the way he's sitting is very casual. And that often, studies have shown, will actually create anger and distrust. This is really important because we don't know that. Me, for instance, this is a natural way for me to sit down. I'm sitting down like right now, I'm sitting like this. I'm what they call a long sitter. I sit back, etc. I have to be very, very conscious that when I'm delivering bad news or having a difficult conversation, that I don't use this posture, that I use more of a leaning posture, something like this. Because if I'm not aware of that, then I'm going to send conflicting. But look at the difference of the nonverbals. This doctor here is at eye level. She's present. She's leaning forward. Her body language and her verbal language are all coinciding together. Just little things like the man on the left with the soft hands, that's a come together, compassionate. The man on the right, that's a tense. That's a doctor who's speaking to you. His fingers are tense. His nonverbals are saying I'm uncomfortable with this conversation, I'm not here, as opposed to the doctor on the left. So one of the things that we have to constantly remind our doctors is that, yes, you are a trained observer, but people are observing you 3 million times a second. And even when we do programs on improving patient experience during happy interactions, it's very important that you understand how to work nonverbal language. And just other beautiful examples. And then the R is the relationship, which is the most important um, thing for families, because in the end, you want to have this trusting relationship. Latoya, I think it was Latoya that I put in touch with a friend of mine, Noel Moore, who runs something called the Finley Project that helps parents, mothers who've had losses, and Noel did a podcast interview. I interviewed her for my podcast, and Noelle talks about the conversations that she had about removing support from her child, who had severe brain injury, and how the first doctor came in, stood up, told her this is what we're finding and that she's recommending that they remove support, and Noelle threw her out of the room. The second doctor came in, knelt down, got at her high level, used compassionate voice. And one visual that Noelle really remembers is she said, I saw a tear from his eye fall on his khakis in slow motion. And I still see it today. Well, that physician right now is still involved with the Finley Project. They are still friends, and Noelle is still deeply. So there's the difference on how we can make a difference with families. And even just simple things. We did a study where we asked 100 parents who had children that were in the hospital multiple times. And I said to the parents, what makes you feel more comfortable? A doctor who A, comes in the room and says, hi, I'm Dr. Orsini. I'm one of the pediatricians taking care of your baby. Or B, I'm Dr. Orsini. I'm the resident who's going to be in charge of taking care of your baby tonight. Not 50%, but 40%, almost 50-50, chose the resident. And when I asked them, the parents, why are you choosing the resident over the attending physician? And their answer was, that resident said that he was the resident who's responsible for my baby's care. I don't know who one of is. And as physicians, this is what we're trained, but this is something that was wrong. That when somebody comes in and says, I'm one of them, it can mean
Hello,
just,
sorry, I must have been.
hello? Okay. Um, hopefully that was, you still hear me. So, and then that relationship is the power of silence. We talked about that over and over and over again, the power of silence. Dr. Rabbi Kushner, who wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good People, said that, he had a child who died of progeria at 13 years of age. And people would say to him all the time, I don't know what to say. And and Rabbi Kushner said, say you're sorry and then shut up. And so I tell these doctors that when you really get right down to the very basics of delivering difficult news, you do your review, you give the news, you say you're sorry, and then you just be present and shut up. Of course, it's not that simple, but that's the skeleton of it. And as physicians, we get nervous and we start just exploding with medical terms, et cetera. The more the parent cries, sometimes the more we talk, when they just want us to sit there. And then accountability. I'm going to be there. I'm not leaving you. We're going to be here for you. I'm sure my parents tell me over and over again, knowing that the physician, the nurses, et cetera, were, there for them. They weren't looking to leave right out the door. They're going to be there with them all step of the way. And then M is for me, or the next steps. What's the next steps? What is it that is going to happen next? Because so many people physicians think that you know what the next step is, right? And I think it was Tracy that said that she didn't. To say this is what's going to happen next, but we're going to be there to support you through this means the same thing is very important. This is very important with outpatients, where a family doctor might refer you to an oncologist, but you don't know if that family doctor is going to stay involved in your care. You don't know whether the family doctor. So it's important to say this is the next step and this is what's going to happen, and I'll be there. That's a very, very brief kind of way of the way we teach it. I skipped over some stuff, and of course, our programs are much more in depth than that. But with this audience, I think that's the main thing that I'm trying to portray is that you know more than anyone how important communication is, how much it means to healthcare, and it's important that we bring back that compassion that's already deep inside all of us, but that remember that healthcare is not just a science, that it is a human to human interaction and a connection. And without one, the other one can't survive. And so I'm going to leave you because I really want to have a great discussion with everybody. I'm going to leave you with some closing thoughts with parents who had and family members who had very, very positive thoughts about their doctors. Some of them are the same ones you saw in the beginning, but are talking about different doctors and what that means. So I will leave with this last video.
If the family can go away with that, from feeling that you did everything you could possibly do, you reached out to them in a way that they could understand it, that you don't increase their pain. They'll always have the sadness over the loss or over the diagnosis, but they feel it was a shared experience and that you connected with them at some level, and that will become a very positive experience.
He really did take the time where he came to my mother's bedside, he held her hand, and he told her, he says, if you were my mother, I could never have you continue to do this. He says, you're in a lot of pain. He says, and if you want to go, he says, then you do that. And it was just so heartfelt, and I will forever be grateful to him.
I was pleasantly surprised. His mannerisms, his tone of voice, his compassion was something I'll be grateful for forever. I felt like I was with someone I trusted. I felt like someone understood how I felt.
It seems almost cruel to give residents training in everything else in medicine, and when this very important thing comes up, really there's no experience and even no guidance. And so I think it's not a luxury to do something like this. It really is a necessity.
Sort of brought me back to why I wanted to be a doctor to begin with, which I've always been very aware of, but being an intern this year, I've gotten really busy, and I love the medicine, and I love the children, but the truth is that I really did come to medicine to be in a specialty and be in a part of people's lives, to really be able to talk to them, and I wanted to be able to make that bad situation as good as possible for parents.
Pass to the next one. So, in closing, I just want to say there's an old Italian saying that my grandfather used to tell me, the fish rots from the head down. Of course, he used to say it in Italian. And I think what that means is that we take on the culture of our leaders. I have been to programs where the residents don't take this seriously, and almost always it's because of the culture of the leader, and then the leader changes. I think we as physicians, people who are involved in healthcare, whether you're family communication people or social workers or resident directors or chief of staffs, it is so important that we speak about communication. If you're an attending physician and you want to throw your residents off, we used to require that our residents call their mothers every day, right? And then if you really want to throw a doctor off and say, I'll say to the resident, did you call the mom? Yes, I did. And then I'll say, what'd you say? They get so flustered. What do you mean what I say? But the message I'm trying to say to them, it's not okay just to call the mother and say, hey, your baby's doing fine. You have any questions? And then as they're saying you have any questions, you're hanging the phone up. Communication, whether it's good times or bad times, is the base and the foundation of medicine. And if we are going to make that happen, we have to spend just as much time talking about it as leaders as we do talking about doing a proper history and physical or a proper exam. Once we do that, I think that we're going to make the place a little bit better. I want to stop here because I really want to hear from some of the parents. I want to hear some comments, and I'll just talk. If you want more information about the kind of programs that we do, there's the website, theorsiniway.com, or I can always be reached by email. They have my email address. So I'm just going to stop sharing, and I'm ready to just have a long discussion. I want to learn from you also, so let me know.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Your talk really resonated with a lot of folks here on the call, just judging by what everyone's kind of dropping in the chat as we go along here. We did have a question about how do you convince or how do you communicate this information to clinicians who think that doing this compassionate work, this, taking the time to have this approach will take more of their valuable time. How do you overcome that kind of time barrier?
So I've been teaching patient experience, not necessarily bad news, but part of patient experience. And we've gone into hospitals and NICUs and improved patient experience massively through communication. And that's the number one question that I get. Studies have shown, I can give you two studies right now, that actually when you sit down with the patient, their perception from the patient is that you stay twice as long as if you stood up. And I've been doing this for 10 years, and I tell resident physicians, if you do use these communication techniques that I'm teaching you, not only will it benefit from your patient, but I promise you, and I usually bet them coffee, that you will not go home later. Your mother was right. Doing something the first time right actually saves time. And I have never had in 10 years a doctor call me back and said, I've started doing these techniques and I'm not getting home on time. You do, because once you establish that trust, things don't necessarily have to take longer. It's how many times have I seen someone deliver bad news, for instance, be very abrupt or not use the right body language? Then the family member gets angry, and then they're backpedaling for the next 25, 30 minutes. So doing it right actually saves time.
I love that. I love that. Have you had experience with pediatric pain and palliative care in the NICU, and how that teamwork has helped or hindered either family staff relationships?
Well, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I learned through palliative care people and pain people. They're wonderful. It's not a universal statement, but by majority of them are very good at that. I think it's a wonderful relationship, but what I want to explain to the NICU physicians and nurses, that when they start, your job doesn't end. And I'm sure the neonatologist will tell you how many times we see this, is that we talk to the patients, palliative care comes in, or the chaplain, and then we hightail it out there. Well, the family member had a relationship with you for the last 3 days, the last 2 weeks. Just because palliative care comes in doesn't mean you're going to leave. So it's got to be a combination. But it's teamwork, and it has to happen.
How do we get every association and board to agree to have this kind of training
Well,
implemented?
it's a matter of what you prioritize. And that's where the family-centered care people can really come in to say to the hospital, listen, this is important, especially when it comes to medical education. You know, the budgets are so tight. Now, when we do these programs with professional actors, of course, it's more expensive. But we also do learning modules and things like that. Um, they would much rather spend money on a shiny new, bulletin board. Um, and then what happens is they end up getting themselves. So it's difficult because now we do stuff with medical error disclosure, and those people, we teach them how to do that. The risk managers, et cetera, they know that that's important, right? So they're willing to invest in that training. But for residents, I've had rep program directors go, yeah, I know it's important, but I can't spare them from clinic. The whole training for a resident takes an hour. I think you can spare a resident for an hour. A doctor is going to have 250,000 patient interactions before they retire. So if you teach them how to communicate for an hour, that saves 250,000 patients. So it's just a matter of getting it to them.
I love that. Dr. Jess, did you have something to add?
Oh, Anthony, I'm a fan. I was just
Jess
gonna
was on
say,
my podcast.
I was just gonna say, my question is, are you hiring? Because I could come and work with you. That's kind of all I want to know.
I would love to hire you as soon as people start paying. We'll be good. I had a neonatologist call me from a major institute in California, not yours, and she said, "Oh, we want you to train um, 40 doctors over a period of week. We want you to fly in your professional actors, your staff, etc." And I'm like, "That's fantastic! What a great thing!" And she's like, "Well, we only have $1,500."
Oh,
And I said, I can't fly in 8 people to Los Angeles and spend 4 days in hotels for $1,500. And her response was, well, this is not that important to do it more than $1,500. So this is their mindset.
yeah. Have you trained other disciplines in this practice, or is it unique to physicians?
No, we've trained social workers, advanced providers, risk managers. We've trained nursing managers on conflict resolution, patient experience, et cetera. So we'll train anybody with communication, and we go from the role playing sessions, both remotely and in person, but all the way down to, the least expensive learning modules but of course you get what you pay for.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate all of your expertise and insights, Dr. Orsini, and thank you, Tracy and Latoya, for sharing your lived experience and a little bit about what you do at Rooted and Connected Forever and the Skylar Project. Anthony mentioned a lot of really great books during his talk, and I will be sharing those in my follow-up email. Again, this recording will be shared on our YouTube channel and in a follow-up email next week. And I have a gut feeling that it's going to have a lot of views. There's a lot of really important information here, and I think that this is going to be a great resource for our community members. And we so appreciate everybody who took time out of their week and their day, their schedule to be with us today. Thank you so much again to our amazing speakers. And please reach out if there's anything we can do to support you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
All right.